Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Planning and Development Control Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Omid Miri. I am the newly appointed chair of the committee. Just like to begin with a few housekeeping points. The fire exit is towards the back in the lift lobby and down the stairs. There are no fire alarm tests scheduled for tonight. Toilets are also at the back in the lift lobby, and a hearing loop is available for those who need it. Just before we move on to item 1, I'd just like to start by saying a few words. First of all, I'd like to thank my predecessors in this chair, former councillors Rachel Layton and Adam Connell, for their years of diligence, care and fairness, and for their years of service as councillors more generally. I'd also like to welcome the new members of this committee, Councillor Siobhan Verdier, the Vice Chair, Councillor Souslouse, Councillor Walsh, and Councillor Pascu-Tilbury, and to welcome back the existing members and to thank them for their years of service. I know that we will all want to draw on their experience, expertise, and wisdom. Councillor Harvey, Councillor Harcourt, and Councillor Carmel. And of course, to thank all the council officers who have put tonight's meeting together. I look forward to working with you all. If there are no other comments, I'd like to now move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence, and none have been received. Moving on to item 2, declaration of interests. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Yes, Councillor Harcourt.
Thank you, Chair. I'm declaring an interest on items 7 and 8, which are the ones about Old Oak Common Station. I sit on the Old Oak OPDC Planning Committee, so it'd be inappropriate for me to take part in any discussion here, although I'll stay in the meeting to hear the views here because they need to be represented at OPDC.
Thank you very much. Okay, now moving on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on 20th of April, 2022. Are the minutes of the previous meeting agreed? If not, please say not agreed and explain why. Okay, I'm not seeing any objections, so we can approve those minutes as agreed. That brings us to item 4, which is the first application, 14 Sedgeford Road. And can the presenting officer, Neil Egerton, please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. So the application is 14 Sedgeford Road, and the proposal is for the erection of a rear roof extension, erection of a rear extension at second floor level over part of the existing back addition, erection of a single-storey rear extension to the side and rear of the existing back addition and related alterations in connection with the conversion of the existing property from a 6-room house in multiple occupation into a 7-room house in multiple occupation. The application site is shown here on the map. Sorry. It is an end of terrace 2-storey property at the junction of Sedgeford Road and Aycliffe Road. So he's currently in use as a 6-bed house in multiple occupation. The property is not in a conservation area. Just show some photographs now of the site. This is an aerial photograph. The application site marked in red there. And you can see from here that there are rear roof extensions and second floor extension plus ground floor extensions on several of the other properties in the street. There's a further view of the rear elevation. So this is the application property here, marked with the cursor. To the right, there's a rear roof extension and a pole extension. And again, on this property. And then we see there's some large single-storey extensions on neighbouring properties. This is the view of the rear of the site from Aycliffe Road. You see that currently the existing boundary to Aycliffe Road is a rather ramshackle sort of timber fence that would be replaced as part of the application. That's just the front elevation taken from Sedgeford Road. And then that's the property on the opposite corner, number 16 Sedgeford Road, as viewed from Aycliffe. That's property to the rear of the site, number 2 Aycliffe Road. The existing layout of the property, you have got 2 rooms at ground floor level, plus a shared kitchen, utility room and toilet. At first floor level, then there are 4 rooms for the HMO and a shared bathroom and shower. Again, this just shows the side elevations and the front and rear. The proposal, the room 1 at the front would be retained and enlarged, and then a new kitchen dining area would be created here with 2 further rooms, room 3 and room 4. All of these rooms would then become ensuite. At first floor level, again, there would be three rooms, again, slightly reconfigured so that they can be ensuite and provide better accommodation. And then within the roof extension, there would be a further room ensuite with kitchen. Look at the side view here, you can see the rear roof extension there with the extension on the second floor level there shown here. And then at ground floor level, you have this single story extension that wraps around the existing back addition. And then it shows here the replacement timber fence has been proposed. That's the section through. And then this gives a further view. It's quite a large footprint, the site. The ground floor extension shown here in grey. So large rear garden and front and side would remain as part of the development. Officers are recommending approval for the development. It's considered that the extensions are in keeping with the established pattern of development in the area. It would improve the quality of the house HMO accommodation. Whilst we have had concerns from residents, particularly around parking matters, the applicant has agreed to enter into a legal agreement to restrict the occupiers of the HMO from being entitled to obtain an on-street parking permit. So officers recommend, the recommendation is that committee resolve the Chief Planning Officer authorised to grant permission upon the completion of a legal agreement subject to the conditions, plus obviously the second recommendation where any minor change to the heads of terms or to the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, for that report. I'd like to move on now to committee members' questions to officers for clarifications. And I'd like to begin with a question of my own. Firstly, I'd like to draw your attention to page 15 of the agenda, which is under item 2.2, which details objections received from neighbouring properties. The third paragraph down raises the point that the previous planning application, detailed on page 14, referring to an existing 4-bedroom HMO. That the previous planning application refers to a 4-bedroom HMO, whereas the property is now a 6-bedroom HMO. So can you clarify how the number of bedrooms has increased from 4 to 6 without a planning application having been submitted between then and now? Thank you.
Yes, my understanding is that there was uncertainty and confusion with the original application as to what was being applied for, rather than amend that application. It was suggested that the application should be withdrawn and a fresh application put in to clarify the position, so that, you know, there is currently has a license of the 6-bedroom HMO from the council. So I think there was just confusion on behalf of whether the applicant or the agent, I'm not certain, but there was that uncertainty.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Harcourt.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions, really. The first one is paragraph 4.22, where it talks about, obviously there's 6 bedrooms, but it talks about potential occupancy of 12 people. Could I have your opinion on whether you feel that is perhaps an overdevelopment of this particular property? 6 people in one property is one thing, 12 is quite a substantial increase.
I mean, certainly, as a result of this development, the rooms would be reconfigured and they would be larger than they currently are. There is a standards for housing multiple occupation, the room size, etc., are different to traditional residential units. So there is potential for some of the rooms to be occupied by more than one person. I don't think it's sort of guaranteed. I mean, the extensions themselves are in keeping with what has been approved in the area, and there's nothing to say, nothing to say that a house in the area with similar extensions could have a similar number of large rooms, and a large family could be accommodated. So I don't think particularly that it would be regarded as overdevelopment.
Yep, Councillor Harcourt.
Yeah, and the other question, thank you for that. The other question was around, the sort of objections that come up every time an HMO rears its ugly head. Residents object to it for all sorts of reasons. They say it's going to be full of drug users and this sort of type of thing, which isn't the case. But very often, if things are not managed properly, there are issues around rubbish and such like. So is there any management plan accompanying this application?
There is not a management plan accompanying the application.
That does concern me slightly, because I mean that would allay a lot of the concerns that have been raised over here, because it is one of the things that, with HMOs is about having proper management and regular management of the property. So is that something we could look at?
I believe you could, yes, certainly, if you wanted to propose something along those lines.
Okay, could I propose that?
Okay, so Councillor Harcourt has proposed a new condition and Councillor Carmel has seconded. So we will come to that vote at the end of this item before we vote on the application itself. Before we move on, are there any other questions? Councillor Carmel?
I'm afraid so. A lot of them are just follows up. They're on the same subject, because I picked up the same issues. The first one is Mr. Edgerton mentioned about the fence being replaced. Is that how much weight should we give to that when deciding whether to grant the planning application?
You can put whatever you might. I mean, it is obviously the existing fence in poor condition. The applicants propose to replace that on a like-for-like basis. That you can judge that as you like.
Thank you for that. Now, I noticed you said in your presentation, or in answer to a question, that it has a license to be from the council to be a 6-bed HMO. What I'm more interested in, because the licensing arrangement and the planning arrangements are two separate regimes, what does it currently have planning permission for? Does it have planning permission to be a 6-bed HMO, or is it just operating as such?
It is operating as such.
And you can guess what the next question is. What does it actually have planning permission for at the moment?
To the best of my knowledge, it has planning permission as to be a residential unit, a house.
Well, that does concern me somewhat. Are you aware, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're not, currently how many residents there are in the property, and how many residents are planned to be in the property?
To the best of my knowledge, there are around about 6 occupants in the premises at the moment. And as it says in the report, there is the potential for there could be 12 people occupying the development, but there isn't a specific figure,
Segues naturally into the point that Councillor Harcourt raised, which is the question of rubbish. Are officers satisfied, and I know it's an end of terrace and a larger than usual plot, that with the potential doubling of the residents in the property, there is enough space for A, bicycle storage, and B, rubbish collection, and the two can operate in harmony?
Yes, officers are comfortable on that. I mean, at the moment, the proposed extensions would take around about 22% of the existing garden area, and that would leave probably around about 140 square metres of external space still available.
My last question is on para 4.33, which is the 106 agreement. I note that it says prohibition of future residents to obtain parking permits. So by that, I take it that the existing 6 could apply and may have applied and be using parking permits. Is that correct?
I think as the development would allow for the reconfiguration of the existing unit, the rooms would all be changing, that the legal agreement would cover all new occupiers, all occupiers. To me, I don't think that the occupiers would be able to stay whilst the works were being carried out.
However, if they move out temporarily and then come back in, I think there's a fairly sound argument to say that they were existing residents who were not here at the time of the granting of or the implementation of Section 106. So I will propose the deletion of the word future from paragraph 4.33. So it says prohibition of residents to obtain parking permits as secured through Section 16 of the GPA 1974 as amended, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Pascu-Tilbury. Before we move on, I have a question on this item as well, which is in relation to the timber fence that was raised by Councillor Carmel. Item 4.16, that's the proposal to replace the existing fence with a new timber fence. And I think we'd all agree the existing fence is quite run down and dilapidated, as you mentioned. If we go back to item 2.2, which is objections from neighbouring properties, I see that one of the objectors has suggested the erection of a brick wall to mirror the brick wall of number 16 Sedgeford Road, which is adjacent to this property. Yeah, that's correct. And I think that would be far more in keeping with the area, longer lasting. I know that mention was also made to the safety of the residents. A timber fence presumably could be, more easily accessed into the back garden. So can you clarify if that was considered at all during the application process for a brick fence to be erected instead of a timber fence? Thank you.
That didn't form part of the considerations. The application was judged on what was put before us. Obviously, that is a valid point you raised. I can understand that. So, we could consider that if you wish to pursue that matter.
Thank you very much. So I think on that basis, on concerns, again, regarding the upkeep of the fence, the general image of the area and safety of the residents, I think that would be allayed by the construction of a brick wall. So I would like to propose a new condition on this application, which is that the existing fence be replaced with a brick wall rather than a timber fence of the same height as the proposed timber fence, which is 1.8 meters. Do I have a seconder for that proposal?
Seconded.
Thank you very much. That was seconded by Councillor Harvey. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions on this item? Councillor, a comment? Yeah, please.
I am deeply concerned that as an authority, we licensed a 6-bed HMO without there being any checking with planning as to whether it had a valid permission. And I am, as members of long standing on this committee will know, I have deep concerns about what is in effect retrospective planning applications. And I do not believe that we should be, and I use the word in inverted commas, rewarding somebody who has operated a property illegally by A, regularizing it, and then B, granting a significant increase. And I, for one, will not be voting for this, as I do believe it is a significant overdevelopment on what should be a single family home.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carmel. Neil, would you like to come in on that and clarify regarding the number of bedrooms that are licensed on that property? Thank you.
I mean, as I said earlier, it has a license for a 6-bedroom HMO. I'm afraid I cannot comment on what checking was done before that. You know, effectively, this does just allow the increase of one bedroom, albeit the slightly larger the one extra bedroom, but obviously the reconfiguration to provide much better HMO accommodation. But yes, there would be a potential increase in the number of occupiers.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. If everyone is happy to move on. Sorry, just one moment.
I just want to give some legal advice about the parking permits. I think we can't prohibit existing residents who've got existing permits. So if you want to amend the wording in section 106, you have to say it's subject to existing permits, because we just don't have the powers to revoke them.
Okay, well, let's rephrase it then. Any residents taking up at the property from the date of the completion of the application shall not be entitled to do it. Because if they're all going to be moved out, what I was trying to avoid was them exploiting a loophole and potentially getting six permits. And I can understand why the neighbours of single houses who are restricted to one, because they don't have permission to be a 6-bedroom HMO. Now, we might be allowed, if we're really going to be pernickety and say, since it only currently has planning permission to be a single residential home, that there is they should only be allowed to apply for one permit. Because it's an illegal HMO, although licensed in planning terms, I see no reason why we can't impose some extra condition.
I think we just need to say that it's subject to any existing parking permits, and that will cover the existing ones that we don't have powers to revoke.
Councillor Carmel, if you'll allow me. So I think we've received the relevant legal advice, and I think we should heed that. Would you like to make one final comment?
What I want to know is how many parking permits have been issued at the moment, since it only has planning permission for a single family dwelling at the moment. And therefore, if they have more than one, they are fraudulently obtained. And therefore, I would not be happy with voting to continue with fraudulently obtained parking permits.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Harcourt.
Yeah, I don't really want to get involved in great depth on this, but you know, if there's a family of, shall we say, with 6 adult children, each one of them could apply for a parking permit, so long as they are the registered keeper of their own vehicle. So I'm afraid, you know, what you're saying isn't quite accurate at the moment. So if that were a family dwelling house, which, as you might say, that is its current planning situation, if it consisted of 6 adult children, or 4 adult children and 2 adult parents, obviously, they could each have a car, each have a permit in their own name, so long as that car is registered in their own name. It doesn't, you know, otherwise, well, in fact, they could all have it registered in the father's name, but the price goes up proportionally. So
just to, I've obviously misunderstood the new parking permit.
That's not regime. That's not the new one. That's
because I always understood that if you had a second permit for the same property, then the price of that second permit was significantly greater than that of the first permit. And every subsequent permit was charged at a greater rate. Whereas if you've got an HMO with 6 separate addresses per se, they would all be charged at the lower rate.
No, that is not a new.
Councillor Harcourt, if you'd like to make a response, but I'm keen to not get bogged down on a debate.
I'm not going to, because I want to
parking.
move on to another point. It was a point of clarification, which I think was an important one, because otherwise we'd be voting on something without the full information that I think we needed in this committee. So yeah, it's a long-standing policy going back God knows how many years. The point I was going. Yeah, the point I was going to make is that, regardless of all of this, there is a call for this type of property, and it is important that we look at these. I appreciate that they can cause difficulties in some areas, and there's no question, there's been no suggestion here that of proliferation in this area, is there, Mr. Edgerton?
No, my understanding is that around about 85% of the properties in the area are houses, with the other 15 being either flats or bedsit type accommodation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'll now move on to voting. We have, I believe, 3 new proposed conditions for this item. So before the main vote on the report recommendations, the committee proposed and seconded a motion to amend the following conditions, or to add the following conditions. The first was in regards to a waste management program, if that's correct, Councillor Hart?
General management plan, which would include waste and such like.
Okay, general management plan. So I'll now ask each committee member whether the new condition is agreed, and then we'll move on to the next condition. So Councillor Chavot-Verdier, are you voting for, against, or not voting on that condition?
For.
Councillor Harcourt?
For.
Councillor Harvey?
For.
Councillor Suslus?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Carmel? Councillor Pascu-Tilbury? And I'll also vote for. Now moving on to the second condition, proposed condition, which was to replace the existing fence with a brick wall rather than a timber fence of 1.8 metres. Councillor Chavot-Verdier, will you be voting for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Harcourt?
For.
Councillor Harvey?
For.
Councillor Suslus?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Carmel? Councillor Pascu-Tilbury? And I will vote for. And moving on to the third new condition in regards to the parking permits. Okay. Okay. So I think that's all the conditions that we'll be voting on for this item. In which case, we'll now move on to voting on the application itself.
Subject to the amendment of section 106.
Okay, so subject to the amendment of section 106, we'll now be voting on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed, that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant planning permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. That's on agenda page number 10. Councillor Chavot-Verdier, will you be voting for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Harcourt?
For.
Councillor Harvey?
For.
Councillor Suslus?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Carmel? Councillor Pascu-Tilbury? And I will be voting for. Therefore, subject to the changes made in the addendum, the application is approved. And I'll now move on to whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed, also on agenda page number 10, that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Assistant Director, Legal Services, and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or proposed conditions, which may include the variation, addition, or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. Councillor Chavot-Verdier?
For.
Councillor Harcourt?
For.
Councillor Harvey?
For.
Councillor Suslus?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Carmel? Councillor Pascu-Tilbury? And I will also be voting for. Okay, that brings us to the end of that item. And we now move on to item 5, which is 25 to 36 Fitzjames Avenue, Can the presenting officer, also Neil, please introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd say this application relates to the basement of 25 to 36 Fitzjames Avenue. Shown on the plan here, that is the application site here on the right. On the left is the site where proposed cycle storage would be located. This shows the application site. So it's a 5-story plus mansion block on the north side of Fitzgeorge James Avenue, within the Fitzjames conservation area, and the mansion blocks themselves there, as you see highlighted in a dark green, are buildings of merit. Got a list here that there have been a number of similar applications over the years in the area, and the sites shown there, sites A to F, there is an existing permission for basement flats. That's down here. Site G, there in the green, there's a permission granted for 3 flats. Site H, permission was granted for 1 new flat, which was allowed on appeal. And then I is the current site. So we now got some existing site photographs. This sort of shows the existing basement area. Photograph 2 here is along the corridor outside the existing cycle store and the workshop and lockers. Then this is the view from the locker room out into the light well, and this is the existing light well. And again, a view from the other direction looking down into the existing light well. The existing buildings surrounding the light well, say 5-story mansion block. And then this staircase here shows the entrance to the cycle store. Proposed plans shown here, so shows a 2-bedroom flat at basement level with the external patio here in blue. And then there'll also be an external planted out here. There'll be some new slot windows on that elevation where the cursor is showing, label number 7, to increase light into the bedroom. This is the north elevation. This shows the windows in place. And then we have a number of sections through the proposed flat. And then the new proposed cycle storage would be in, say, block 12 to 24, which is, and this is currently a store or workshop area that is no longer needed. Now, this application follows on from a previous scheme that was refused for this site for a 2-bedroom flat. Officers refused permission on the grounds that it was considered to be not suitable quality accommodation. The applicants appealed to the planning inspectorate, who, although they dismissed the appeal, they did consider the accommodation was of a reasonable quality and acceptable. They dismissed the appeal on the grounds that the mechanism proposed via conditions to control access to parking permits was not robust enough. Therefore, they dismissed the appeal on that ground only. This application follows on from that, and the applicants propose a legal agreement to prevent the occupiers of this flat from obtaining on-street parking permits. Officers recommending approval for the development, and with the same recommendation as the previous scheme, where subject to completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. I believe that for this item, we have a registered speaker in support. So I'd like to invite Peter Keenan, the Director of Q&A Planning, to speak on this item. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be quick. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Jonathan Milburn, who can't be here this evening. My name's Peter Keenan. I'm a director at Q&A Planning, and I've advised my client on this site for the last year. The site in question is the lower ground floor of 25 to 36 Fitzjames Avenue, and is used for storage lockers and plant equipment. The proposal is for a change of use to a single 2-bedroom residential dwelling. The site has a long planning history, and planning permission has been previously granted for a very similar dwelling on this site. That previous permission expired, and my client has sought to secure a new permission for a near identical development. The most recent application was refused on the grounds of outlook, and this was subject to an appeal. The appointed inspector disagreed with the council's reason for refusal on outlook. However, because the inspector was not satisfied over the mechanism used to prevent a new household applying for a parking permit, he dismissed the appeal. Incidentally, this was not the reason the council refused the previous application. My clients always accepted the need to restrict the ability of new residents to apply for parking permits, and has agreed to the council's suggested conditions. In light of the inspector's reasoning, it's since been agreed with officers that a legal agreement is needed to prevent new residents applying for parking permits, and hence the recommendation before you today. Given the history, there's no outstanding planning matters of dispute between officers and the applicant. The proposal will make the best use of underutilised land, providing a new residential dwelling fully consistent with policy and the previous permissions on the site. Please, could you vote in line with your professional officer's recommendation? Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Peter. We now move to committee members' questions to officers for clarifications. Are there any questions? I see no questions. Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
Just a question, Neil. You mentioned a few proposals that were previously approved. Could you tell us when was the most recent one? There was a few proposals that you mentioned that were approved. Amongst them, could you tell us when was the most recent one?
Okay. Sorry, I got the planning history sort of tries to cover more than just this sort of site. I mean, certainly the refuse scheme on this one's refused in January 21, obviously, but then we also have had a number of applications before the committee. I don't have a precise date, but certainly around about 2019, we had a number of approvals that were presented to the planning committee where schemes that were previously refused had been amended to take into account inspectors' views. So it's all around about 2019 would be the most recent permissions. You know, these permissions are still outstanding at the moment and can be implemented.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil. Yes, question from Councillor Pascu-Tilbury.
Thank you very much. I was struck by the comments made by residents that the area of the proposed amenity space is either very damp or prone to flooding in hard rain. And I note that the assessment of flood risk at 4.28 has just looked at flooding from a different perspective than that of it being exceedingly rainy. So I was wondering what assessment and potentially mitigation has been made around that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, it is obviously at basement level, so there is always a risk of flooding. A flood risk assessment was provided with the application, and you know that's been assessed by our officers, which set out various mitigation measures, and the condition 4 requires that the development be carried out in accordance with that flood risk assessment. Furthermore, there's condition that a non-return valve and pump device to be installed to prevent sort of sewage back surging into the basement at times. I mean, again, these issues have been raised in the past with previous applications and have been dismissed by the inspector at times, would say that there is, with the proper flood risk measures, then these should not be an issue. So we're satisfied with the views of our colleagues assessing the flood risk assessment that there shouldn't be an issue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, then yes, from Councillor Carmel, please.
Thank you. Members of long-standing on this committee will remember that I voted against this last time, and I think I used the timeless phrase that these were hobbit holes that probably hobbits were too proud to live in, particularly 4.8 and 4.18 and 4.19 about the levels of daylight and sunlight. They do not provide an adequate living space, and I shall be voting against.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. Would any of the officers like to come back on the point about light into the properties? Yeah, if they want to come in.
Yeah, I mean, it is not, you know, it is a basement flat surrounded by a very tall building, so there is a limited amount of light. Again, you know, we have tried this argument in the past with refusals which have not been accepted by the planning inspectorate, and you know, on balance, you know, it's considered that we can't really raise an objection to that the daylight and sunlight levels are at the lower end of the spectrum, but they still provide a reasonable level of accommodation there.
Thank you very much. So I will now move on to voting on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed. That's on agenda page 25. That the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. Councillor Chavot-Berdier.
4.
Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Harvey.
4.
Councillor Souslous.
4.
Councillor Walsh.
4.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Pascu-Tilbury. And I'll be voting for. Therefore, the application is approved. I will now move to whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed, also on agenda page 25, that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Assistant Director, Legal Services, and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or proposed conditions, which may include the variation, addition, or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. Councillor Chavot-Berdier.
4.
Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Harvey.
4.
Councillor Souslous.
4.
Councillor Walsh.
4.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Pascu-Tilbury. And I'll also be voting for. Okay, now we move on to item 6, the land bounded by 58 Wood Lane and Westway. And can I ask the presenting officer, Jacques Duplessis, to please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. The application is for a theatre and events venue to be known as Light City at land bounded by 58 Wood Lane and Westway. I would like to, as a start, just draw members' attention to the addendum. There are 2 items, the first 2, page 46 and page 48. The first one is just to replace the head of law to the most current title, which is the Assistant Director of Legal Services. And then on page 48, There's just a numbering of conditions that need to be fixed. Page 59 relates to condition 35. The condition in the agenda currently reads as a compliance condition, which relates to the license that would give access on the southern side of the application. The suggested condition now is just to require that license should be submitted prior to the commencement of development, because it was not possible to sign that in time before this committee. Excuse me. The application is located in the White City East regeneration area, which can be seen on the screen there as the red dot. The site is also, again, there indicated to be located within the Wood Lane conservation area. If you look at the closer location plan, you can see the site here in the middle. To the north of the site lies the scale space, which is also a 10-year meanwhile use, currently operating on site. To the south of the site is the St. James White City Living development, which is currently under construction. To the southwest of the application site, you could see White City's underground station. The proposals as shown on screen is for the erection of 5 temporary structures for a period of 10 years. They are indicated as buildings T1 and T2, which are 2 theatres. Building T3 is mostly restaurant space and a food hall. Building T4 is mostly a well-being space. And then the last is a front and back of house element to the proposals. Looking at the site plan, if I go from uses from on the right-hand side, you see T1, which is the theatre that can occupy 2,000 seats. And T2 has been shown to the north here, and that's the 1,000-seater theatre. The bit in yellow is the front of house space, and then the middle T3 is the restaurant food hall, and to the front is the wellness space. Just to clarify the boundary of the application site, you can see this bit going up here is to a surface water attenuation tank, which is to be shared with the existing scale space site. And to the right-hand side is just an application to widen that access road to provide access to the rear service yard for the proposals. And also to the south, and this location is a proposed pedestrian bridge, which would give access through the St. James development. This is just showing the site in context. You could see here, which is the 4-story element. To the back of the St. James White City Living development. It shows the outline scheme, what that would look like once completed. Currently, you can see there phase 2, which is this element, is to be completed this year. And phase 5 and phase 4 is to be estimated completion of 2028. If I quickly look at the floor plans, we have a ground floor plan. Again, going from right to left, we have back of house kitchen. And the purpley bit is a restaurant, and then going to the front is the wellness space. We have the upper ground floor level, which would deliver the 2 theatres. The level 1 would provide the access bridge from the White City Living development into the food hall area with some wellbeing space. And then level 2 is mostly the exhibition space, but also a rooftop bar and terrace. If we look at the operating hours, the entire site will be open from 6:30 in the morning until midnight, which is Sundays to Thursdays. And again, 6:30 till just 30 minutes past midnight on Fridays and Saturdays, including public and bank holidays. The theatre space will only provide a single venue performance every night of the week, and that performance will be finished at 10 p.m. On Fridays and Saturdays, it will be a matinee plus an evening event. This will allow for at least 2 hours to leave the venue on Mondays and Thursdays, or 2.5 hours to leave the venue after the 10 p.m. show finishes on Fridays and Saturdays. There's a condition that would ensure that the maximum venue capacity does not exceed 2,500 people at any point. If we look at the southern access, what you can see on screen is the White City Living development once completed. And the red lines through that site shows the pedestrian access. And to the top there in the blue, you'd see the proposed pedestrian bridge, which would give access through to the Troubadour site. This is just an image of what the pedestrian bridge would look like. And if we look at the egress, for people could leave the site after 11 p.m. Sorry, so which is via Depot Road. You could see there, this is the application site, and then people would then after 11 p.m. leave here via the footway of Depot Road. Just looking at the economic and employment strategy, there's a condition that will be attached to any permission. And just highlighting some points here, it would secure at least 10% of employment associated with the project will be for local residents. And also at least 10% of the spend of the event is on local businesses. It will also ensure engagement with local arts organizations to maximize opportunities. And lastly, there's also a ticketing levy towards the Troubadour Trust to support local initiatives in Hammersmith and Fulham. Recommendation is that officers recommend the application be approved subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacques, for that report. We now move to committee members' questions to officers. Are there any questions? Councillor Carmel.
Thank you. First of all, I think this is a fabulous scheme, but I just want some clarification. You said that the theatre would be restricted to being a single venue 7 days a week, but it only doesn't operate 7 days a week. It operates Tuesdays to Sundays, according to paragraph 3.10, unless it's a bank holiday, in which case it's allowed to open on a Monday. Or if it is a bank holiday Monday, are they allowed to open since they're limited from Tuesday to Sunday?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, the operating hours is Sundays to Thursdays, 6:30 to midnight, and Fridays and Saturdays plus bank holidays would be the extra half an hour in the evening.
Sorry, to go back to put it simply. If the bank holiday is a Monday, are they allowed to open? Because it seems to be a subset of, you've got contradictory conditions. One says you can't open on a Monday. The other one says if it's a bank holiday, you can open. I just wondered what the actual position was.
Jacques doing in a minute, it's normal practice for us to distinguish between the bank holidays. Normally you'd get Monday to Friday, Friday, Saturday, if on Sunday. The intention certainly is that the hours would include the bank holiday insofar as
to paragraph 3.10. You can't say that you can't open on a Monday in one condition and in the next condition say you can open on a Monday if it's a bank holiday without making it specific. I'm sure there's a specific legal principle about that, which I'm sure the legal advisor could elaborate on, but it's been a long time since I studied this.
I think as the
revisit that for you for clarification, but the intention is clear, and certainly if you mention a bank holiday, that obviously trumps general Monday if it's in the condition and worded as such. But no, one comes first.
Thank you very much. Would the legal advisor like to come in?
Could we have a minor amendment to the condition to just confirm the bank holidays excluded?
Isn't always a Monday, happens to be in the Monday like the same. The bank holiday is by definition a bank holiday. It might happen to be a Monday as well. The point is, if it says bank holiday in the condition, it clearly relates to the bank holiday. arguably in those circumstances, you'd need to exclude this last Thursday, which is also. Oh, but if we were going by the day as opposed to the type, I mean, I think the common way of addressing this in case law is, you know, what does the sort of person ombudsman take? I think it's clear, but we can obviously tinker with it if you think it needs clarity.
Sure. Thank you very much, Councillor Carmel. Just a moment for me to clarify with the legal advisor. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Carmel, would you like to propose that as an amendment?
I'm happy to propose that we, using recommendation 2, which certainly will be passed, come up with a single word. But if you really wanted to do it, you change 3.10 to say, instead of saying including public bank holidays, you just say take out including, put in the word and cover Mondays.
Okay, Councillor.
Otherwise, bank holidays only cover the Sunday and Thursday.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carmel. If you're happy to move on, I will now move on to voting. No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Harvey. Oh, sorry. Yeah, further questions.
Sorry, I've got a question. Please don't move on. Because my curiosity is getting the better of me. Why, because it's such an amazing development, why is it restricted the times to closing so early? Because I would have thought we'd want to encourage, you know, a thriving nighttime economy. So I don't understand why it's closing so early, why those conditions are there. Is that our conditions, or is that what the development wanted?
It's a large venue. I mean, it's something that we all, I think, agree would contribute to the area if it's managed properly, and if it doesn't result in any adverse impact on residents. And then our residents immediately opposite the entrance in the Wood Lane estate. So part of it's about sort of managing expectation, and part of it is about seeing how it works in practice. If we're then looking to extend hours, I mean, in fairness, sort of midnight is roughly the hours we would give in a town centre. This isn't a town centre, but it's still getting 12 o'clock and 12:30 at a weekend. So I think it's a compromise, to answer your question, but it's a fair one, I think, given the potential for disruption if we don't manage it properly. So it gives us that opportunity to revisit once it's in place, and once we've got some experience of how they manage it and how it works, and the comfort of knowing that even an extended period at weekends, for example, could still be managed in a way that is beneficial to the area and not harmful. The other angle on it is to do with managing the kind of numbers, the sheer numbers of people, and that's linked more to the access arrangements. So at the moment, there's only Depot Road leads down there, and I think the consensus view is that all those people all using Depot Road to access and leave at any one time is not going to be acceptable. Hence the pedestrian bridge and the deal with St James to use their sites, which is advantageous to them because it's the connectivity north-south, and it gives their residents access to it as well. But by the same token, it allows us to split the numbers leaving the site and entering the site at least up to 11. And when that bridge is in place, again, we can revisit that, but we don't think it'll work with just one access. So we don't want to be sort of pushing it too far at the moment until such time as it's bedded in and the access is provided, secondary access. And we see how well that works. And that's the reason for the single theatre event in the evening as well, until the bridge is provided. And it's the reason that the theatre's brought the closing time forward so that their customers, if you like, can leave and use the bridge. So it's all these things knitted together. It's the sort of balance. So we're certainly not looking to penalise, and we're just trying to manage any potential fallouts until we get a better understanding of how it works in practice.
Is it possible that you can show us again the exit on the map so we visualise them leaving? Was there another image? So on the. Yeah, I was interested to see the estate opposite it, or see how close it was and get that understanding, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very narrow road, Wood Lane, at that point, and there's a lot of development up there, and obviously the Wood Lane estate sort of faces onto to the station, I think, more than anything. So that's sort of, if everybody is walking up and down sort of Wood Lane in the early hours of the morning, that's potentially an impact. So what we tried to do was work out a system whereby there's a sort of a staggered arrival departure period, and where you can redirect some people away from Wood Lane through the site coming out by Westfield, the tube, with a view to reducing the risk of not late night noise and disturbance to residents, particularly those in Wood Lane. Obviously, there's residents in White City Living as well, but White City Living developers are happy to support this scheme because it adds benefit to those potential residents as well in terms of the connectivity and in terms of having this on the doorstep.
So could I ask how long, so what would happen if you want to extend the close times later on down the road? How long do we have to wait? And would it have to come back through planning or licensing? What would be the process?
Well, anybody can apply to vary a condition. I mean, the general rule is that there's no point doing that until it's been running a while, so we can see the evidence that it's working properly, and there's a reduced risk. I think here as well, because the land that this is built on is part of the Imperial College Master Plan. It's their southern campus. It is a 22-year sort of build program. This southern bit here, where they are, and why they're happy to give them a 10-year license, is not due to come forward during that time. So they're looking to get some sort of income out of the use of the site, which is the reason they've got the existing temporary use on the site as well, joining this. So it's beneficial to Imperial to encourage it. It's beneficial to White City Living as well. And the only kind of variable, if you like, is the extent to which all these various moving parts work together to bring forward something that's both attractive to borough residents and not harmful to those who happen to live close by as well. I mean, there's a lot of numbers. If you look only at the numbers, 3,000 people is a lot of people, especially they're all spilling out into one road at the same time. So yeah, it's with that in mind that we've tried to tailor the conditions so they work as a whole as a sort of safety net. And we'd be more than happy to revisit those as requested. It's not uncommon for developments of this scale and larger to want to revisit conditions in due course. But for now, and this is obviously done in collaboration with Troubadour, this works for them and it works for us.
Thank you very much. I'll bring in Councillor Harcourt, followed by Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points. And as I recall, Troubadour had a previous temporary theatre a bit further around the corner in South Africa Road, directly opposite Wood Lane Estate, and what's now part of White City Gateway, I think it's called, is it? That development. Sadly, that didn't seem to be too successful, but this new one is quite a bit bigger. I have spoken to people on Wood Lane Estate about this, and they do suffer with crowds. I mean, there's a football stadium just a couple of 100 meters up the road, and there's always complaints about that. But admittedly, that's 19,000 people rather than 3,000, but nonetheless, the principle's the same. But they didn't seem to have any real objections to this, and the only comment, in fact, that they came back to me was the previous theatre gave them free tickets. Will they be getting them this time? Don't answer that. Sorry.
Thanks. There is actually, I think it's within the condition economic development that there is mention of potential free or discounted tickets for locals.
Okay, Councillor Harcourt, would you like to come back?
No, that was partly a throwaway, but it's nice that they are offering that, so that's good. And it is a welcome addition to that part of the borough, quite frankly.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to a point mentioned by a councillor. It's about the exits. So we're talking about 2,500 people exiting the venues in the evening. I wanted to go back to the map that has Depot Road on it, if that's okay, on the screen for the millions of viewers at home. Thank you. So everyone here can see on the left is Depot Road. So that's one of the suggested exits at 2,500 divided by 3 is 800. I've been on this road myself. I felt quite unsafe. There is no street lighting, and we're thinking the residents could exit at night with children around cars. What's the way to mitigate this? Has there been any thinking around this? Is Depot Road due to change? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As part of this application, there is no proposals to change Depot Road. I do have an additional image that I could show that does actually show here. You see there's a lamp column here, and then just off screen to the left, there's another lamp column. And there's also lighting within these the side barriers here along the side. So it is lit at night, and there's also the protected barrier on this side. And there's also been some calculations in terms of the number of people they expect to leave after 11, which is it's like 520 people, and that's at maximum capacity. So that's the worst case scenario. And this width has been shown to be adequate for that.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question on the railings that you're showing on the screen. When was this built in? Is this a recent picture?
Yes, this is a very recent picture. Yeah, I don't know exactly when they were constructed, but this is very recent. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question in regards to condition 48A of this application on page 62 of the agenda. That refers to a minimum of 10% of the employment associated with the project to be made up of Hammersmith and Fulham residents. I understand that's defined as people living within the borders of Hammersmith and Fulham. Also, condition 48E, which refers to 10% of the spend on the events to be spent on Hammersmith and Fulham businesses. What room is there to increase that minimum threshold? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The 10% seems to be already challenging for our economic development colleagues to get. There seems to be an oversupply in built environment sector jobs at the moment, and then they have actually applicants for. They said that the focus at the moment is to give opportunities to unemployed job seekers and those facing barriers to employment. So they will ring fence those 10%, but as it is, it's shown as at least 10%. So there is definitely opportunity for an increase in that. Yes.
Thank you. And just to clarify, this is not a target, this is a minimum. So they have to achieve the 10%. In
this case, yeah, it's at least 10%.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Sisters?
Yeah, sorry to go back to the point about the pedestrian bridge, but I was wondering if, since we've agreed that obviously opening hours will vary during the week, and the development will be allowed to stay open until later on Fridays and Saturdays and bank holidays. Is there a point on having the pedestrian bridge, its timings also vary during the week so that it can stay open until later on those days that the whole development remains open until later? Because it may well be that shows finish at 10, but it may also be the case that visitors stay at the whole venue until later because it is open later.
Thank you, through the chair. The whole sort of strategy with regard to access and egress is based around the long-term requirements of the land and what's there at present. And the fundamental issue we had with this was the numbers of people and the only access egress being Depot Road. It doesn't work on that basis. So we were then at pains to try and find a way through that. And the way through that is the agreement with St James to open up this access through their site, which allows you then to split as well as kind of phase the plan. So the 11 o'clock closing that bridge isn't the end of the world for who are left on site, because they could probably manage to use Depot Road, and Depot Road itself will be upgraded as part of the Imperial Master Plan. There's a new junction and there's a new bridge, vehicular and pedestrian, over the railway lines planned as part of that in the first phase. So we're dealing with the situation on the ground now as opposed to what might happen. The cost of that, clearly, of getting that deal with St James and indeed getting a license in due course now, is St James's requirement to have a degree of certainty is not going to upset their residents as well. And I believe that the 11 o'clock closing of that bridge was at their request rather than, and Troubadour have had to modify what they're doing to fit in with that. Now, they may be prepared down the line again to revisit that, but at the moment, without that agreement, it doesn't work anyway. So I suspect that's what Troubadour, that's their priority, is to get the permission, get it working, show what they can do, and then possibly revisit some of these other agreements they have in place.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. A question to the legal advisor. What power does the addendum give St James's to influence whether the site can be operated or not? If we agree to this condition that there should always be a license for the site to operate. Thank you.
There are other conditions on the permission that require the developer to have an alternative arrangement in place.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Pascu-Tilbury.
Thanks very much. It goes back to the 10% question. Bearing in mind that this is an ongoing strategy, what happens if that 10% is breached? I say this also in the knowledge that culture and hospitality are having massive staffing shortages at the moment, and it's just very, very difficult to get the numbers often.
Sorry, Councillor Pascu-Tilbury, was that if the 10% is breached, did you say?
Yes.
Right.
Just can't get the staff to get the capacity.
Sure. Sure. Thank you. Yeah, officers.
I mean, it's a positive thing, and you know, it's a two-way sort of collaborative thing as well. It suits them, it suits us. So we're not going to go in with 2 feet if there's a problem, and provided there's an evidential base for the problems they've got. And you do often see it on specialised jobs. You're not going to get apprentices doing specialised jobs that take years of practice, you know, certain types of demolition. But you can normally, with a use like this as a hub, if you like, you can normally find other elements. I mean, for example, something like Westfield, you know, lends itself to the retail sector. Here you've got hospitality, some retailers, bar work in there as well. So there are opportunities there, and the objective, if you like, is to train people and identify people who are most in need, and to sort of be able to target those opportunities when they come. So it's about a success as much as anything. If that success means, you know, there are deliverables there that can be demonstrated, but you're coming in slightly under the 10%, and yes, we'll work with them to try and increase that, but it wouldn't be the end of the world, I don't think.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, yes, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question regarding the structure itself. As it is a temporary venue, and at some point it is going to be dismantled, what guarantees has there been put in place or been provided about the reuse of certain materials or the sustainable disposal of other materials that will be used in the construction of this temporary structure?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair. We do have a condition number 27, which requires a sustainability statement, which kind of, they need to show how sustainable the materials are that they're about to use on site. There is nothing that in there that's saying that how they would dispose of the structures, but through experience, it's shown that they tend to reuse these buildings on sites, and I think it's actually some of these structures are going to be with the ones that was used just on the opposite side of Wood Lane at the previous site. So reused White City Place, sorry.
Have we received any guarantee from the developers of the site that that will be the case?
We haven't, and I'm not sure we could refuse permission on that basis. What we could do, subject to your agreement, is seek some additional information from them and provide it to you outside of the determination process, if you think that works. But I think for on the basis of what we have before us, the conditions that are in the report are probably sufficient. I'm sure there is a sort of an explanation they can give you that will give you a bit of comfort on that as well. And we're happy to sort of, to forward that on if you would like us to ask those questions. I'm not sure we could justify withholding permission at this point on the basis of, that they may or may not reuse the materials. I mean, there is anecdotal evidence of them reusing the materials. And as Jack says, the condition requires them to sort of submit information that gives us the comfort on what they're using and, how they're sort of putting it up on site. It doesn't, however, deal with what happens to it after the 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, if the legal advisor would like to come in.
Could we deal with it as an informative on the permission?
Yeah, we could. Well, I don't think it's an informative. Yeah, I mean, we can do that certainly, but I think the quicker way would be, maybe in parallel with that, would be to just, as you have to speak to, I'm sure they've got people there to be more than happy to explain what their sort of end user sort of protocols are or whatever. So, I mean, they have enough of these going on all over the place, so I'm sure this is something that they deal with on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? No, I see no further questions. So I'll now move on to voting on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed. That's on agenda page 46. That the Chief Planning Officer will be authorized to, that the Chief Planning Officer be authorized to grant permission subject to the conditions listed below. Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Souslous.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Pascu-Torbure. And I'll also vote for. Therefore, subject to the changes made in the addendum, the application is approved. I'll now move on to whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed. Also on agenda page 46, that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Assistant Director, Legal Services, and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorized to make any minor changes to the proposed conditions, which may include the variation, addition, or deletion of conditions. Any changes shall be within their discretion. Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Souslous.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Pascu-Torbure. And I'll also be voting for. So that is approved. Thanks very much to the officers. I'll now move on to item 7, which is Old Oak Common Station. Can the presenting officer, Sinead Winship-David, please introduce the report? And just to remind everyone that Councillor Harcourt has declared an interest in this item, so will not be participating. We're just having some mild technical difficulties, so bear with us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for slight technical issues. So item 7 this evening relates to a high-speed 2 application on which the OPDC have requested observations from the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham on. So as I mentioned, it's relating to high speed 2. It's a plans, what's known as plans and specification submission, and this relates to some ancillary buildings within the wider Old Oak Common site. So the Old Oak Common station itself has planning permission, not planning permission, has consent through the High Speed Rail Act. And this application seeks very minor amendments to the ancillary buildings surrounding the station itself. And just as a reminder, we are being simply asked for our observations on this application. The OPDC are the local planning authority and will be determining this application rather than ourselves. So as a very brief introduction to the High Speed Rail Act, it grants deemed consent for phase 1 of High Speed 2, including all the stations and associated works. And it allows for consent to be granted on very certain matters in relation to these works through the local planning authority. So our scope is highly limited in terms of what we can actually consider. So in terms of the ancillary buildings application that we're looking to comment on, it's more or less limited to the design of the buildings. And that would be the scope of what we could comment on here realistically, specifically on the ancillary buildings application. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the site and its whereabouts, but it's to the north of the borough. The London Borough of Ealing is to the immediate west, and we are to the immediate east of the site. And it's just to the north of Wormwood Scrubs. Very briefly, this is the aerial context. And so I'll just go quickly into introducing what the amendments themselves are. So the first amendment is to the cycle hub. Now, there won't be any changes to the actual cycle storage provision. That will be maintained. It's simply that High Speed 2 have been able to move some of the plant equipment out of the cycle hub itself and into a more appropriate building. And this is the best image we had available of what was approved on the site. So it's very little change in terms of the appearance here. And then this shows the ancillary buildings to the west of the site. So you see on your left, that's Old Oak Common Lane. And the changes comprise of very minor increases in height, changes to the form of the buildings, and the ability to amalgamate some of the vents into the head houses themselves. So the buildings that we're looking at are the bronze coloured buildings on this plan. So the changes are required in response to flood mitigation, which has been identified as being necessary, as well as the emerging design of the urban realm and the site restoration scheme around the site, which we'll come on to in item 8. And then this is the eastern realm. And again, this is the ancillary buildings. They're again just head houses, and the same amendments are sought as in the western realm buildings in terms of small alterations to the height. It's worth noting that Hammersmith and Fulham did not raise any objections to these ancillary buildings as part of the Old Oak Common Station application. And we recommend again that no objection is raised to the amendments sought to these ancillary buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No questions? No? Okay. We can now move on to voting on whether the recommendation in the report is agreed. That's on agenda page 95, that the council raises no objections to the OPDC in relation to this application. Councillor Chabot-Verdier?
For.
Councillor Harvey?
For.
Councillor Suslus?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Carmel? Okay, Councillor Pascu-Tilbury, and I'll also be voting for. Therefore, Therefore, the recommendation is approved. And I'd like to invite Sinead to cover item 8 as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is again in relation to High Speed 2. It's again observations to the OPDC on an application that they will ultimately determine with their planning committee. So this one is a site restoration scheme as well as a plans and specifications submission, and it relates to the urban realm surrounding the Old Oak Common Station. It also involves amendments to the on-site road layout, which again have previously been approved by the OPDC. I won't run through the site location again, and the aerial context. So the purpose of this plan is to show how the site is laid out, how you have the western urban realm and the eastern urban realm. And what this plan shows quite well is the termination of the eastern urban realm and how that doesn't connect with the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham and Scrubs Lane to the east. And this is one of our key issues with this application, is that lack of connectivity. So I'll briefly go through some views. This is looking east towards the borough, and this shows the western parkland that's proposed and the road layout. Again, this is looking east towards the station. Some indicative views of approaches to the station. And this is the secondary access route, which is adjacent to a future development site that is anticipated to come forward at a later time and not under the High Speed Rail Act. So this kind of helps demonstrate some of the officer concerns. So one of the issues that we do want to raise an objection on the basis of is the lack of connectivity and future proofing of connectivity to our borough. And the connectivity to Scrubs Lane and to the Grand Union Canal. So one of our key issues is that although there are potentially proposals in the future for the Old Oak Common Bridge, which would allow for connectivity, this isn't going to be brought forward by under the High Speed Rail Act, and it's likely to be delivered at a much later stage of the project. And what officers would want to see is this connectivity being delivered at a much earlier stage of the development and allowing for the benefits of the Old Oak Common Station to be realised as part of the opportunity area in the north of the borough and to help with the regeneration of that area generally. Again, this really emphasises the termination of the connections to the east and that there will not be any connections to Scrubs Lane at this stage of the development. The second objection that officers have would want to raise is in relation to the road layout. So as I mentioned earlier, the road layout has previously been approved by the OPDC. However, Hammersmith and Fulham officers did raise significant concerns, which we believe have not been addressed through this submission either. So many of these concerns relate to pedestrian safety and cyclist safety, a general lack of prioritisation of cyclists and pedestrians across the site. And this is shown on, this is the western elements. This is the approach to the site from Old Oak Common Lane. And particularly concerns are raised in terms of pedestrians approaching the site and how they will access the station. And this is again the eastern realm, and in terms of our concerns with this element, it relates to the future proofing of the connectivity that could come forward at a later date, connecting to the east to our borough, and how safe and accessible this would be for users of the access, and whether it would be feasible to continue the cycle route along this element, and could that feasibly be achieved. And we have significant concerns in that regard that we would like to raise with the OPDC. And this very briefly just shows the pedestrian movements through the site towards Old Oak Common Station, and again emphasises that the connections are all coming from the west, from Ealing, and there wouldn't be connections from our borough into the station. This just very briefly summarises the key issues I've run through and I set out in my report to the committee. And then a recommendation is that we raise an objection to the proposals.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to officers? Councillor Chevot-Verdier.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to understand what the rationale was explained to you. What was explained to you when they justified not having a connection into our borough through the Eastern Realm?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. So through the actual original intention, we go back to the image of the, maybe we go back to the treaty, that'd be great. So the original intention was, as part of the OPDC local plan, that would have been delivered through to the car giant sites in north. And because obviously the amendments that have been taking place to the plan have now omitted that part of the scheme, alternatives have been reviewed and kind of early feasibility studies. But there isn't any commitment to those at this stage, which is again part of the reason why we're raising the objection to this in terms of the infrastructure that's provided.
Thanks very much. Are there any further questions? No, I see no further questions. So I'll now move on to voting. Thank you very much for the report. On whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed, that's on agenda page 104, that the council raises an objection to the proposed development for the following reasons. 1, highway impacts. Additional information is required to fully demonstrate that the road layout and associated features can operate safely and to further demonstrate compliance with the London Plan. Please refer to the attached committee report to read the full assessment of the proposal and the council's requested revisions should permission be granted. Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Sislus.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Pascu-Tilbury. And I'll also vote for. Therefore, the recommendation is approved. I'll now move on to whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed, also on agenda page 104, that the council raises an objection to the proposed development for the following reasons. Insofar as it relates to the connectivity of Old Oak Common Station with the wider area, the design of the urban realm is unacceptable. LBHF strongly recommends that wider links and connectivity to Scrubs Lane, the Grand Union Canal and Wormwood Scrubs are delivered at an early stage of the development programme. Further details of LBHF's concerns in this regard are provided in the attached committee report. Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Sislus.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Pascu-Tilbury. And I will also vote for. So therefore, the recommendation is approved. And we come to the close of the meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight's meeting and for those watching online. The draft minutes of this meeting will be published on our website shortly. These will be formally approved at our next meeting on the 5th of July, 2022. If you have any queries concerning the applications in the interim, please contact the case officer in the application report. Thank you very much.